Namaskar, greetings. Welcome dear learners to the CEC lecture on explaining political communications. Dear learners, as we take this discussion forward on explaining political communications, this topic is of huge significance for not only students and learners from the realm of political science, communication studies, mass media, but also this concept has a very important interdisciplinary significance for all disciplines alike. So, as we take the discussion forward on explaining political communication with a specific focus on the landscape of political leadership and communications, let us first understand the importance of communications. And as you all know, communication, it's the act of giving, receiving or exchanging information, ideas and opinions so that the message is completely understood by both parties. Communications, it's not only a process of transmission of information, but dear learners, communications is a very important two-way process. So, in this aspect of exchanging, receiving information, ideas and opinions, communications performs certain important functions also. Firstly, communications has a very important informative function. That is, it provides knowledge. It fulfills desires for awareness of things that affect them. Further, as we talk about functions of communications, it is also having a very important command and instructive function. That is, communications makes individuals aware about duties, about organization structure. Communications also has a influensive and persuasive function because communication motivates, it directs and guides behaviors. Communication, dear learners, also has a integrative function as it integrates the activities and efforts. As we talk about communications and look at its important functions, communications has a command and instructive function also. That is, it makes individuals aware about duties, organization structure. Communications has an integrative function because it integrates the activities and efforts. It has an influence and a persuasive function because it motivates, directs and guides behaviors. So, with this opening context of communication and its functions, namely that communication motivates, communications informs, it suggests, it warns, communication orders, communication changes behavior, communication establishes better relationships, communications makes interaction meaningful, communication makes oneself understood. So, with these important functions with respect to communication, as we take the journey forward in this lecture explaining political communication, we will now also be looking at various forms of communication. Various forms of communication having their own advantages and disadvantages. And dear learners, this understanding of importance of communication with reference to the very important discussion on principles of communication, elaborating on various types of communication, namely with respect to what are the advantages and disadvantages, shall again present to us the paradigm of political communication in a bigger framework. And again, this concept of knowing political communication has a very important bearing with respect to the skill enhancement, skill development abilities of all learners. Communication, to quickly revise, what do we mean by communication? It is sending, receiving and sharing information through various forms of media. Now, as we talk about various forms of media, dear learners, this also underlines that communication has had a historical trajectory over the time. With advancements in technology, mediums of communication too have witnessed changes. So, again when we talk about communication, it is important to situate it in the bigger framework of skill. With that, let me ask you all a question. What do you understand by skill? And yes, you rightly guessed, skill is an ability to do an activity or job well because you have practiced it. And again, this is something that I am quoting from dictionary cambridge.org. So, skill is your ability to do an activity or job well, especially because you have practiced it. Further, dear learners, when we talk about skills, skills are individual abilities to perform something based on education and or training. So, as we try to understand skills, dear learners, communication is one of the most important soft skills. And again, this important soft skill also tells us the huge significance of understanding the concept of political communication. That is, when we talk about skills, they can be mapped into two categories. Hard skills, they are job related competencies and abilities that are necessary to complete work. Soft skills, they are personal qualities and traits, the non-technical skills, that is teamwork, problem solving, critical thinking, etc. And all of these enhance your relationships with others. So, when we talk about hard skills, that are job related competencies, soft skills, these are the personal qualities and traits. Understanding communication, as we just said, communication is one of the most important soft skills. And as we try to decode the concept, the process, the elements that are there in communication with the bigger focus of political communication, all of this becomes very important, not only as a soft skill, but that how this knowledge gives you a very enhanced perspective of how the public sphere goes ahead. So, communication, it is a highly valued soft skill. Communication affects every part of our lives, from ideas, thoughts, facts, opinions, expressions. Communications, it is the ability to communicate clearly and effectively, both orally and in writing. And this is why this very important focus on communicating clearly and effectively, seen in the bigger framework that it is one of the most important soft skills, makes space for why communication is very significant. Now, let us now look into certain typologies of communication. Intrapersonal communication. It is the process when one communicates with one's own self. It is a process of communicating with oneself. Intrapersonal communication can also be understood as an internal dialogue that occurs within a person's mind. Intrapersonal communication. Now, what can all this include? It may include self-talk, act of imagination and visualization. In intrapersonal communication, we communicate with ourselves. Now, what are the advantages of intrapersonal communication? It is often remarked, it is important for increasing self-confidence. There are a lot of studies that have gone into that how self-dialogue is important for self-esteem and self-confidence. Next, interpersonal communication. Communication that takes place when at least two people interact. Example of it, face-to-face interview, face-to-face dialogue, face-to-face conversation. The emphasis is laid on speech as well as non-verbal forms of communication. Next, typology of communication, group communication. Communication within and between groups of people. Now again, groups may be small or large. Group communication may be formal or informal. Informal communication network ignores formal channel of network. Formal communication follows certain structures. So therefore, as we have looked into the typologies of communication, namely as we just understood the intrapersonal communication, interpersonal communication, group communication, and further the bifurcation into informal and formal communication. We now go towards the principles of communication. The very important principle of communication is understanding. Messages must be clearly expressed, whether orally or in writing. And let's understand the practical side of this principle of communication. That is, when you are using communication in the practical reality, messages must be complete. Message should leave no scope for any doubts likely to confuse the recipient and compel him towards a misinterpretation of the message. The next principle of communication, attention. Attention, that is, communication must be made in such a manner that it invites the attention of the recipient to it. Let's understand the practical side of communication, of this principle of communication, that is attention, that is the message to be expressed in a pleasant and sound manner, but also the purpose of the sender in making the communication should be clear. So therefore, attention, as we discuss it as a principle of communication, that is, communication must be made in such a manner that it invites the attention of the recipient to it. Moving forward, principle of communication, brevity. That is, the message to be communicated must be brief. However, again, very important as we try to understand message, it must not be sought at the cost of clarity or completeness of the message. So, each principle of communication has to be understood in the full scheme of things. Equally, one also then has to understand that what it demands, that is, as we just discussed, brevity, message has to be communicated, it should be brief, clear. However, it should not be sought at the cost of clarity or completeness of the message. Taking the discussion forward, principle of communication, timeliness. That is, communication must be made at the right time when it is needed, at the high time when needed to be communicated to the recipient. And the practical side of it, when we talk about timeliness, especially in the landscape of political communication, that is, delayed communication loses its purpose and charm and becomes meaningless when the right time for action on it has expired. So, very important to look at timeliness from its practical side, that is, communication should be timely. Delayed communication loses its advantage, and all this becomes very significant when we are looking at the public sphere. Taking the discussion forward, principle of communication, appropriateness, rationality. That is, communication must be appropriate. Communication must be rational in the context of realization of organizational objectives. The principle of communication, taking the discussion forward, feedback. Dear learners, communication is a two-way process. That is why feedback is important, making for better and improved dialogue, transmission of information, and improved human relations also. Now, as we talk about the various principles of discussion, so from therein, we will now move towards types of communication. And herein, we will try to decode communication through the medium through which it is expressed. Verbal communication. Verbal communication implies process of exchange of information or message between two or more persons through written or oral words. So, again verbal communication, as we decode according to Bowey and others, that is verbal communication. It is the expression of information through language which is composed of words and grammar. According to Penrose and others, verbal communication consists of sharing thoughts through the meaning of words. Verbal communication, dear learners, is further divided into oral communication and written communication. Let us now understand both the types and also their advantages and disadvantages. Oral communication, it is the process of verbally transmitting information and ideas from one individual or group to another. Oral communication, dear learners, it is the process of conveying information through the use of verbal and visual aids. Further, it is communication by speaking. Understand its practical sides now. Let us take, as we discussed, let us now understand its practical side. That is this communication, oral communication, it is the fundamental skill for building relationships. It is very important for expressing ideas. In oral communication, the two parties to communication, that is the sender and the receiver, they exchange their views through speech. Further, let us now look at advantages of oral communication. Oral communication, dear learners, has the ability to receive instant feedback and clarification. It maintains confidentiality of the subject matter of message, as the messages are sent through personal contact. Oral communication, dear learners, has immediacy and space for real-time feedback, emotional expression through tone and non-verbal cues. It has high level of understanding and gives space for transparency. It is interpersonal. So, these are some of the advantages of oral communication: instant feedback, real-time feedback, emotional expression, interpersonality, amongst others. What are the disadvantages of oral communication? It lacks record keeping. The listener cannot retain oral messages in his memory for a long time. Taking the discussion forward, let us now talk about written communication. It involves conveying ideas and information through the written word. What could be the examples of written communication? Various formats such as emails, reports, letters. Exchange of information through written words. This is very important. That is understanding in the context of digital turn right now, that how the format of written communication has also witnessed change from handwritten letters to electronic emails, amongst others. It can also take place in traditionally therefore on paper and more in the sense of modern aspect, that is on an electronic device. What are the examples, some forms of written communication that are often used in political communication? Applications, posters, leaflets, journals, books, and again all of them Written communication has a huge canvas now because all of them, from applications, posters, leaflets, journals, books, from theoretical to practical, from traditional to modern electronic, all the forms are there. Written communication, as it depends on written words, it demands a high level of precision. So, therefore, certain essential elements of written communication: conciseness, clarity, good command on language and grammar. Advantages of written communication when we are making use of this medium in the framework of political communication. Written communication gives the advantage of legal existence. It can be stored in documents and it can be used for further reference and evidence. It carries more values for legality, and further, because it is documented, it can be produced and validated at any time. What are the disadvantages of written communication? Absence of immediate feedback, time consumption, misinterpretation, absence of personal touch, encoding and sending of message takes time and lengthy process. Further, let's now talk about non-verbal communication. Non-verbal communication, if we go by the definition of scholars, that is, it is the communication that takes place through non-verbal cues, through such form of non-verbal communication. And what could they be? Gesture, eye contact, facial expression, clothing in space, and through non-verbal vocal messages known as paralanguage. Non-verbal communication means all communication that occurs without the words, that is bodily movement, space, time, touch. Further, non-verbal communication includes any communication including, that is, without the use of words. Now, what are the disadvantages? Misinterpretation, culture gap, lack of clarity, ambiguity, and that non-verbal communication is context dependent. So, therefore, these factors need to be carefully analyzed when we look at the picture of the big picture of political communication. So, formal communication, that is through rules, conventions and principles that are followed. Further, it occurs in formal and official style. Informal communication, that is using channels that are in contrast with the formal communications, and that is, it, unlike formal communication, it does not follow authority lines. So, therefore, it is argued it helps in building relationships also. And as we talk about various types of communication, please understand that communication has witnessed huge changes. So, therefore, we are often talking about audio-visual communication. The process of transmitting information or ideas using both sound and visuals, combining sound and visuals through films, TV, video chats. It is a strategy that uses both the hearing and the visual to improve the overall communication experiences. So, dear learners, explaining political communication, while we talk about this topic, it is important to look at advantages and disadvantages of various types of communication, and also look at that how the process of communication is very dynamic. It has multiple stakeholders, and that it is a very dynamic two-way process. Dear learners, we hope that the lecture presented to you important inputs and insights. We look forward to encouraging positive feedback from you all. Thank you very much.